Hello, my name is Creostix, and welcome back to the list of the top 25 favorite horror games of mine of all time. And this time we'll be covering numbers 10 through 6. And once again, at this point the competition is so stiff that the numbers 10 through 12 are not exactly interchangeable, but they are so close that they are all almost equally as good as horror games for me. So even if something is in the low top 10s here, it is still a rock solid horror game in my opinion. So, bear that in mind. And I have been wrestling, suplexing, just doing all kinds of just Boston grabs on myself to try to just get these numbered, and it's hard. I'm not sure I'll ever be completely happy with any of the order I'm gonna go here, but I've I've made a system and I'm sticking to it, and it fits to that system where it's both the concept of how good a game is and how scary a game is, and then just how do those just feel as a complete package of a horror game. So actually, it is in some cases possible that a game that is higher than a different game is not exactly a better game, but it can be a better horror game because yeah, so that's kind of the metric we're using here. But indeed, number 10 is Fear, or FEAR, First Encounter Assault Recon, but colloquially and everywhere known as Fear. Fear is an action FPS game that utilizes the Ring sort of horror, or Yuan the Grudge sort of horror, where the main scare thing is this supernatural power being ghost but not ghost thing called Alma, and it's like this indeed Samara Sadako like girl with long black hair that causes gruesome death. That's the premise here, and it's an interesting case where this game is it's scary even when you have quote unquote all the guns. Like you get just pistols, shotguns, SMGs, assault rifles, whatchamacallit. Oh well, I'm just anything really, even up to some uh, lightweight rocket launchers and all that stuff, and it's still scary. And this is my one of the better examples of a game doesn't have to be a sneaky horror insta kill runaway sort of a thing. How about you can fight and it still just breaks your mind sort of scary. It's amazing. And the premise is that you are a person called Point Man. You're actually never really, I think, referred to as that, but that's your name. The idea is that you need to. You've been ordered to catch Paxton Fettel, telepathic commander. I know, just bear with me. A telepathic commander of clone soldiers, which are these replica soldiers that are, human but clones, but not really human. They don't really think for themselves. They are controlled by the telepathic connection to Paxton Fettel. And on top of being scary as hell, the combat is fun and smart because the enemy AI, even in a game like this old, I think it came out in like 2005. Even in a game this old, the AI still surprises me and is really smart. It's gonna flank you all around everywhere and being just overall smarter than you'd ever expect. And to make it more fun, you have slow motion powers that help you fight and make the combat feel even more thrilling and indeed fun. And it's one of those cases where I am sort of immersed in what I'm doing, but it still keeps me immersed even when I sometimes die because if I f up the combat or something. Because this is an example where you have the combat mechanics to fight the notion that you can die, and that makes death in immersive horror games much more okay to me. That's like okay, because I need to steel myself against that horror and fight, being, smart and tactical and all that good stuff. And it just, then it doesn't pull me out as hard because it's giving like fuel to the notion of just hardening your psychology and psyche against the horror you're seeing. So in that sense, the avoidance of death fail state is good in a horror game. For me, I need combat mechanics to contextualize or to wave away the contextualization of death, at least in some part. It would be good if it was still contextualized, of course, but if you can, if you have combat to fight the impending death, then it just doesn't bother me as much because it's just feeding into this other sense of what you need to be doing, which is the sealing yourself against the horror, much like in, say, Doom 3 or something. And the only minus really that I can think of is in the middle area of the game, there's an office building that's a little longer than it needs to be, and the environments there are somewhat samey. But in the end, it's one of my all-time favorite horror games, and I just absolutely love it. And I've done a Let's Play of it if you want to see it. Also, I wondered about putting Fear 2 in here, but I have just played that less. I have played through it, but I just, it's on one hand, Fear 2 has some spots that are more scary, but then it sort of puts down the scariness by being sometimes a bit of a mech game, even like you have these mech sections. But also, one you might need to keep an eye out for just is Fear Extraction Point, which is something I'm currently playing on the channel, and it's probably going to be just about ready when I get this out. And it's in some ways even more scary than Fear. It's a little bit less meaty on the lore, but it's scary as all hell, and I recommend this one and Fear Extraction Point especially, like those two, just wholeheartedly. Please try them. They are kind of forgotten in some ways, in some circles at least. But yeah. And then moving on, number 9 is The Evil Within. The Evil Within is this third-person action horror where you are Sebastian Castellanos, a police detective who, with a couple of partners, is called to answer an incident at a mental hospital. I'm really not going to, spoil the story beyond that, like what's going on, because understanding what is happening is kind of part of the fun and part of the horror of what you're doing there. So it's kind of the not knowing and like what's going on, why is it like this? That's just, if you haven't gotten spoiled on that yet, you just might as well just play it and just experience it for yourself. And it's, I wouldn't say it's a huge spoiler necessarily, but it's still like understanding the goings on for yourself is just makes the experience even more rich, let's say. And it's largely like a meld of action horror and psychological horror in both, well, almost both literally and figuratively, really, but yeah. And indeed, without saying what the story really is, I like the premise they built for themselves, because it creates this game environment, really, where almost everything that happens is, you can headcanon that and contextualize that to make sense in the context of the story you're experiencing. Maybe, not absolutely everything, like, game over, death state, like, but beyond that, pretty much all of it. And even technically speaking, maybe even a game over, but or maybe even a game over, but you might need to stretch your suspension of disbelief a bit there, but still, the setting is very good in keeping everything like neatly just together in that it's, I want to say believable in like in its own world. Like this makes sense to be here when you put it into this context. Let's say it's almost like almost anything can happen and it'll make sense. It's much like it's really like an Resident Evil 4 type of a game with monsters and all, but the gameplay itself is refined a lot from that, from the granddaddy of RE4, and it has more than just zombie-like things as well. Just to give a bit of a heads up that you're not going to be just shooting zombo-like enemies in that game. There is also one stealth section, and later on in early stages, stealth is an option in order to conserve ammo, but it's not mandatory then. The only mandatory stealth section is the one at the very beginning, and I can stomach one. It has an insta-kill element to that one section, but it's not very difficult, and I can stomach one, because it creates this arc of giving you a bit more, power and weapons and such to combat the threats you're seeing. It sort of gives a nice arc to start from that, just go through that. It'll take like not long at all, and it's not really that bad necessarily either, unless you just happen to die a lot, but I didn't, luckily. But indeed, only one of those, and then it's just an action horror game and all good. Well, mostly really good. And then I also I have some notes here. I'm trying to see if I'll remember what I needed to say about this game, or wanted to say. But I really appreciate the fact that the monsters and the enemies and even the places themselves represent something in context of the game's lore. So every enemy type and even area has a reason for being there. That's still kind of almost unusual in many horror games, and I really, really like it when the enemy design represents something that's an actual thing in the game, or in the lore, or in the backstory, or something. That they have a metaphorical or such and such reason for being what they are. So I always like that. It builds a more rich world. The one minus, really, that I can bring forth maybe is that some of the bosses could be more clear on whether or not you should fight them or run away. It's kind of... Sometimes you see this boss that you can't kill, and then a bit later on you see the same boss again, and then you either can kill it or at least have to fight it, but before you didn't, and it's not clear if you should or shouldn't. And ammo conservation is a thing, so having to waste bullets and not knowing if your bullets are going to be a waste, that kind of annoys me. But that's like the one thing, really. There's a couple of instant kill fail sections of fighting / running away, but they're fairly short, and they're not the meat and the potatoes of the game. The meat is action survival horror of the RE4, mold, really, and a good one of that kind of game. And then number 8. This is going to be an interesting one that you might not really be expecting, even on any list, but here we go. Right. Number 8 is Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines. I know, wait, what? But that's an RPG. I know. It's a vampire RPG made in the Half-Life 2 engine, where you choose your class and choose what skills to put where, and you can be a good hacker or a lockpicker or both, really, or a seducer or a fighting melee or ranged and such and so. And different classes have wildly different, experiences, such as one is a hideous bat, I think it's actually called Nosferatu after the old movie, and another is essentially just crazy, split personalities or crazy otherwise, and it shows in the dialogue options. And so it actually matters a lot what class you choose. But that's just to give an idea that it really, really is an RPG. Yeah, and the perspective is actually a combination of both third and first person, depending. I think you can change it even on the fly. Maybe I'm not even sure. Yeah, I think you can, and it's except when you have firearms, then I think it's always first person. But it's like a hybrid of those. But it gels so well that I don't really like make it into a thing of can I or can't I change it. It just feels good to play. And indeed, it's kind of a different take on horror, even really, because what if you are a horror creature? You sort of live and breathe the horror. But also, you encounter things that horrify you to your core in your adventures. Because you keep seeing these just quests that have this like, wow, stuff that just, at least just unnerved or dreaded or scared me out of my boots. It's like, wow, woo. It takes place in LA, more specifically in Santa Monica, downtown, Hollywood, and Chinatown. And the streets and street corners with the downright superb background music just oozes atmosphere. It's like I remember a line from a movie that went something like, "I am a newborn vampire weeping at the beauty of the night," and that really just fits my idea of what I'm like feeling when I even think of this game. And mostly and partly because of that, the overall moment-to-moment adventuring is just chilling on its own because of the atmosphere that's constantly there. And every once in a while, you really do get like a crazy either main or side quest that causes dread or horror or both, and ooh, like, and then on top of that, you can be the even bigger just horror creature or just a bad creature by say finding out what's causing the horror of some place, and then convincing an innocent person to go there to meet the end because you get something for like you can do those things. It's like, oh, yikes, ow, and there's also this masquerade mechanic that means that you can't just openly do vampiric things in plain sight in the city streets in front of civilians or the police, because whenever you do that, it creates a masquerade violation. I think you have like 5 points to spare on that, and when you go out, you get the ire of the vampire hunters, and I believe the game ends there. I haven't actually tried it because I always felt like I don't want to fail the game. No, but yeah. It's not a huge issue. It just means that don't, go crazy on city streets. When you're pretty much every time when you're indoors doing a quest or something, you don't need to worry about that at all. It's not a hindrance on how you can play the game, in my opinion. It's more like a cool little feature that adds to the believability of, well, I'm a vampire in, this city where there's also just actual people. So I like it. And it's really one of these cases where it's one of my favorite overall games to begin with, and it has this surprising amount of horror and shock value and dread and atmosphere just put in throughout. The one minus that you need to be maybe aware of if you try this is that it can be a buggy game, because it wasn't really... It was made by Troika Games that sort of went under at the very end of making this, where they couldn't completely polish it out. So you might encounter some weird bugs sometimes, but honestly, in my experiences, there's less bugs than in most but in many not fully functioning like full releases of today. Like what I've seen of some games that have like just come out, like big AAA games even, and I'm like, and they called Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines buggy. Ooh. So yeah, it can have glitches that might bother you, but not like constantly something. At least not for me. But just bear in mind that's a thing that can happen. And then number 7 is Alan Wake. Alan Wake is again a third-person action horror, well, thriller horror game by the people who made Max Payne. You're a writer called indeed Alan Wake who has gone to like a cabin vacation in a mountain forest town called Bright Falls with his wife. And after a small intro in a cafe and said cabin, you seem to wake up from a blackout of the mind and in a crashed car. Like, okay, and the rest is figuring out what's going on, surviving, just understanding the full extent of the story and like why, what, who, when, and it's a spooky game. The spooky forests, especially, are possibly the most spooky forests I've seen in anything, almost, really. They really nail the look and feel where a dark, moving forest just looks oppressive. It's like, ooh, And you fight these shadowy monster people with a combination of a flashlight and some other light sources and a gun. They have this mechanic of light as a weapon and as a save spot. And also, a flare gun is essentially a rocket launcher. So that's the method we're going for here. And it takes a lot of influences from Stephen King and, say, The Shining and such, like, American horror stuff. And it also has the Remedy tropes of these in-game TVs that have fun stuff in them, radios you can turn on and listen to, etc. And while it may be in some ways a bit less scary than some of these games here, or the other games here, but it is still thrilling, and honestly, it's a combination of the spooky just surviving in the forests and of the understanding of the story of what's like has happened and is happening. It hits on almost a childlike nightmare feel of dread, which I kind of like. And uncovering the story itself was, especially when it came out, was just a breath of fresh air. So I really enjoyed it. And it felt and still feels like something different in terms of how to tell horror. There's a lot of monologuing as well, and it's not afraid of doing its own thing. It sticks to its guns of what it wants to do, and it actually, in my opinion, sticks the landing really well. The one thing you may need to know to your disappointment is that the game is no longer digitally available because of the music licenses, which is just like weird reason. Like, wait, you didn't get the licenses to just sell it always? Why? So you probably would need to track down a physical used copy, either on PC or Xbox 360. However, I would be surprised if it's just, they sold a lot of them, so it shouldn't be a huge problem to get one, I think. At least I hope, because I hope that people still somehow will be able to experience this game, because I think it's one of the cult classics of the horror thriller game genre. I know how words work, and just if you can get a chance, give it a go. And next up is number 6, Dead Space. Dead Space is a third-person, gory action horror on a large spaceship. It's a case where you are a person called Isaac Clarke, an engineer or something that answers a distress call in that large spaceship with a couple of your colleagues. You go in and shit hits the fan immediately. Well, almost, yeah. The enemy designs in this game are creepy in the most feral way. they essentially turn people into these like sharp, spidery, zombo things that gives at least me the creeps. Especially if you go in blind into the game, you don't know like why things are the way they are. The relentless gory horror just coupled with the confusion of like what is really effective and stressful. It's like like I remember when I first played the game, I actually needed to take a break, like of multiple months, because at that point I wasn't as routined in playing horror games, and it was so scary that I just had to just take a break. And going forward was like I'll get back to this in a while. I eventually did and finished it, of course, but still, like that is, ooh, it's really really just whoa, I like it. And the combat is interesting because it emphasizes shooting off limbs instead of heads, which is, because the enemies sort of take more damage in like losing their limbs instead of headshots. And the beginning area weapons are these plasma cutters and such that shoot cutting lines and all this. It's flashy. Well, it has some blue lights going, let's say, that sort of flashy combat, but also extremely gory because, removed limbs, lots of blood. Yikes. And yeah, the inspirations come likely in part from Alien, but also from this movie called Event Horizon, because if you look at the spaceship design in Event Horizon in this game, it's remarkably similar. It's like, whoa, that's the Ishimura, like, the spaceship. Like, okay. Dead Space 2 is also good. I recommend that as well. 3 is like Dead Space 3 is an okay action game and a co-op game, but it's a big step down in atmosphere, and the story is dumb and even anti-consumer because it cliffhangs you, and it's like, buy the story DLC, and the story DLC also just ends just in a way that isn't conclusive, really. Like, okay, sure, whatever. But yeah, Dead Space 1, a superb modern classic, just ooh. I hope you have tried it, but if you haven't, please do, it's good. And with that, I'm gonna cut this list off again here, and next up we'll be covering the top 5. But I do hope indeed that you've enjoyed this. And if you have, please do drop a like or a comment, or even subscribe or share if you want to. It will really, really help. And thank you so much for watching. And I will see you again next time.